please be advised that there is material that will be presented that is not AA conference approved material. We believe that Joe and Charlie clearly state when they present material that is not AA conference approved material. The presentation has been color-coded to better assist you as to the origin of the information.
These 12 steps which we are so proud of, and rightfully we should be, but I think sometimes we need to stop and look and see where these things really did come from. You know, step one came to us from a medical doctor, a neurologist in New York City, named Dr. Silkworth, who was non-alcoholic. Step two, the idea of the spiritual experience, came to us from a psychiatrist in Switzerland who was non-alcoholic. The last 10 steps came to us from a group of people called the Oxford Groupers, who were basically non-alcoholic people. Everything that we use in our program of recovery to recover from alcoholism came to us from non-alcoholic people. I think it would do well for us to remember that too. And it's absolutely amazing. Bill always said, he said, I knew none of these things. He said, all these pieces of information gelled in my head from these various different sources, and from that I was able to write the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. We alcoholics didn't think of any of them.
Dr. Silkworth, he identified what the problem was, but he didn't have a solution for it other than don't drink. And Dr. Freud here, he had the solution, but he didn't know what the problem was. Dr. Jung had the solution, but he didn't know what the problem was. The Oxford groups had a planned program of action, but they weren't interested in alcoholism at all. But like Charlie said, all this information gelled in the mind of Bill, and he was able to put it all together and write it down in this book so that we could read and study it today. Thank God that happened that way.
Now, I can almost see Bill as he's writing this book, and probably as he finishes up a chapter, he sits down and kind of reviews it, what he's done up to this point. He's probably able to say in his own mind, I've been able to show them what the problem was through the doctor's opinion in my story, Bill's story. And he said, now I've been able then to show them what the solution to that problem is through chapter 2. The power of the fellowship which supports us, and the power of the vital spiritual experience which changes us, bringing about recovery from alcoholism. So we got a little bitty picture we'll throw up here for just a moment to illustrate this solution to alcoholism. And on one side of that, it shows the fellowship. And the fellowship through the older members, providing strength, experience, and hope for the new member, provides enough power, enough strength for the newcomer to be able to stay sober for a period of time. And by the way, it's a two-way street. As the older member supports the new member, the older member draws strength from that too. Lots of strength in the power of the fellowship. It will be almost impossible today to be in AA very long and not begin to believe that there must be some power greater than human power working within and throughout this fellowship. When you hear countless hundreds of people saying it's only by the grace of God, or because of a power greater than I am, or because of God as I understand Him, I haven't found necessary to take a drink in X number of days, weeks, months, or years, whatever. You can hardly hear that over and over and over again and not begin to believe that there must be some power greater than human power working in this fellowship. When the newcomer begins to believe that, then that makes them willing to investigate. And upon investigation, with the help of a good sponsor, they find this simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. The 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as they progress their way through the steps, again with the help of a good sponsor, they're going to have a spiritual experience, or a spiritual awakening, or a personality change sufficient to recover from alcoholism. It will revolutionize their whole attitude toward life, toward their fellows, and toward God's universe. And when that happens to the newcomer, they now have become an older member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they can go back to the left-hand side of the sheet. And they can support the next newcomer that comes in. And then they can be the sponsor that can help the next newcomer go through the simple kit of spiritual tools. And if you'll notice, we're basing older membership not on how long you've been sober, but upon the quality of that sobriety. Our book makes it very clear in several places. You can't give away something you haven't got. And we can't help another person have a vital spiritual experience unless we've had one ourselves. And way back in the beginning of AA, there was never any doubt about this. The newcomer was told when they come in that in order to recover from alcoholism, you're going to have a spiritual experience. You're going to have to work these steps, and you're going to have to change. And they were told, if you're not interested in doing that, then you might as well leave us alone, because there's nothing we can do to help you if you're not willing to do that. And then slowly, as we got away from our program, and we began to depend more and more on fellowship, then people quit having the vital spiritual experience. And we begin to measure success then by how long have you been sober, rather than by the quality of that sobriety. We went from a life-changing program to a non-drinking fellowship. Now then, today, if we can go back into this life-changing program, we're going to find that more and more people that come to AA are going to recover from alcoholism, and not so many of them are going to go out there and have to start drinking again. You know, you see a lot of people in AA today that's only been sober for a short period of time, maybe 6 months, maybe a year and a half, 2 years, and they got hold of a good sponsorship, a good sponsor. They got right into the program. They had a vital spiritual experience, and they are absolutely changed people. You just love to be around them. They're always laughing and cutting up and having fun. They're always doing everything they can to help AA and to help other alcoholics, and you just love to be with them. You see others in AA who have been in here 7, 8, 9, 10 years. They treated it like a cafeteria. They took what they wanted and they left what they wanted. Now, they're better than they used to be, but you never know what kind of shape they're going to be in the next time you run into them. One day they're up and one day they're down, and they're kind of like a yo-yo, going up and down and up and down and up and down. Did you see some that have been in here 15, 16, 18, 20, 21 years? Never worked a step. Damn proud of it, too. And they're the ones that say, by God, if you want what we've got, then they're willing to go to any damn... You know, some of those guys feel so bad you'd like to buy them a drink. You know they would feel better. So we're not talking at all here about length of sobriety. We're talking about quality of sobriety. And those that have had a spiritual experience can help the next one have it. Those that haven't can't, and it's just that simple. So that's the real solution to alcoholism, is not only the fellowship, which supports us, but the vital spiritual experience which changes us. And I can see Bill as he's reviewing this in his mind, saying to himself, I've shown him the problem in the doctor's opinion in my story, Bill's story. I've been able to show them a solution now in chapter 2. And then he probably says to himself, they're not going to like that solution a bit better than I did. You know, he had an aversion to what Ebby was bringing to him. He didn't want to talk about anything that even sounded like God, religion, and etc. And he said, I think what I better do is tell them just exactly now what's going to happen to them if they don't find that solution. And he sits down and he writes another chapter, chapter 3. And he called it More About Alcoholism. He's already explained alcoholism to us. But now he's going to tell us more about alcoholism. And in chapter 3, we're going to find that he talks about one thing and one thing only. Step 2 says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, if we got to be restored to sanity, then that indicates we must be insane. And many alcoholics are highly offended when you bring this up. They say, oh, no, don't tell me I'm insane. Yeah, I do some pretty crazy, stupid things when I'm drunk. But when I'm sober, I react much like normal human beings do. Other alcoholics say, well, I don't have any trouble with that insanity because I remember the crazy, stupid things I did while drunk. In either case, they're referring to the crazy, stupid things we did while drunk as insanity. No, that's not insanity at all. The crazy, stupid things we do while drunk is caused by a mind filled with alcohol. And alcohol changes the personality when we put it in there. And we're going to do some pretty crazy, stupid things while drunk. But that's not insanity, that's caused by alcohol itself. In order to understand what he meant by insanity, eventually we found it necessary to go back to the dictionary and look up the words sane, sanity, and insanity. And we find the dictionary defines a sane mind as wholeness of mind or completeness of mind. A mind that is whole, a mind that is complete, can usually see the truth about everything around it, makes decisions based on truth, and life turns out to be pretty good. An insane mind is one that is less than whole, cannot always see the truth about things, makes a decision based on something that's not true, and life usually turns out to be pretty lousy. It does not mean you're crazy. You know, if you're crazy, that means you've lost more than half your marbles. And you got to be locked up somewhere to protect you and society from you. Insanity does not mean you're crazy. It just means you're less than whole. I think one of the most perfect examples I ever heard is from my friend Joe from Little Rock. And Joe said, let's take a pie and cut it in 10 pieces and put it here on the table. And you come along and I give you a piece of pie. And he said, my pie is now less than whole, but I've still got 90% of it. Somebody else comes along, I give them a piece of pie. And my pie is now more or less than whole, but I still got 80% of it. He said, insanity does not mean that you're all gone. It just means that you're not quite all here. And when he said it comes to alcohol, it seems as though we're not quite all here, because we can't always see the truth about alcohol and make a decision based upon a lie, and then we run into the truth, and life becomes an absolute living hell. And as we go through this chapter, he's going to use the best method in the world to teach. He's going to use different examples to indicate and explain insanity. He's going to show the man of 30. He's going to show a fellow named Jim. He's going to show the jaywalker. And he's going to show a fellow named Fred. And each time we're going to look into the mind just before we take the first drink. Can we or can we not see the truth? If we can see the truth, we're sane. If we can't, we're insane. Let's look at our insanity for just a little bit.
You know, if you start to read this, we're going to see words like obsession, insanity, delusion, illusion. If you're not careful, you're going to think that he's talking about many different things, but he's only talking about one thing, and that's insanity. But he uses different words to describe the same thing. I looked up these words in the dictionary recently, and obsession, disturbing preoccupation with an idea or feeling. Illusion, a mistaken idea. Delusion, a persistent belief in something false, typical of some mental disorders. Insanity, foolish, not mentally sound. It all has to do with the same thing. They sound like the same words to me. So keeping that in mind. He said more about alcoholism. Most of us have been unwilling to admit that we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think that he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it's not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we're like other people, or presently maybe, has to be smashed.
Now here again you see Bill repeating himself, but using a different term each time he does. In the 2 paragraphs that Joe just read, he's used 4 terms, 4 words. They all mean the same thing. He said the idea that somehow, someday will Cole enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. Now we know that an obsession is an idea that is so strong it can make you believe something that's not true, make you believe a lie. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. We know what an illusionist is. An illusionist is a magician. And they can stand in front of you and with sleight of hand and a few props make you believe something that isn't true. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity. Insanity is to believe something that is not true. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently maybe, has to be smashed. If you've deluded yourself, that simply means you've come to believe something that is not true. So you may see any one of 4 words: obsession, illusion, insanity, or delusion. And all 4 of them mean the same thing: to believe a lie. Let's go over to page 32, 2nd paragraph. Let's look at the example of the man of 30. And let's look at the lie that he believed just before he got drunk.
So the man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he would get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. Now, he made up his mind that until he'd been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man. He remained bone dry for, I'm going to say this, he remained stark raving dry for 25 years. He remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55 after a successful and happy business career. Then he fell victim to a belief which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline has qualified him to drink as other men. Out came his carpet slippers in a bottle. In 2 months he was in a hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital meantime. Then, gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem, which money could buy, was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Though a robust man at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. Now, this case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us have believed that if we remained sober for a long stretch, we could thereafter drink normally. But here is a man who at 55 years found that he was just where he left off at 30. We've seen the truth demonstrated again and again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we're in a short time as bad as ever. If we're planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we'll be immune to alcohol.
Now we know the truth to be this: once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. We've never seen one single case where one of us was able to go back and resume normal drinking like normal people. Now, to believe anything other than that is to believe a lie, to believe something that isn't true. Now, is this guy, this man of 30, is his real problem the fact that he has a physical allergy to alcohol? Or is it the fact that he has a form of insanity that tells him it's okay to drink alcohol after 25 years of sobriety? Based upon the idea that he could drink safely after 25 years of sobriety, he took a drink of alcohol. Then he triggered the allergy, then he couldn't stop, and then he was dead within 4 years. But is his real problem the fact that he has a physical allergy? Or that he has a form of insanity that tells him it's okay to drink? The real problem of the alcoholic centers in the mind, telling us we can drink, rather than in the body that ensures that we can't drink. Page 34, second paragraph. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he's already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. Many of us felt that we had plenty of character. There was a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it, this utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. How then will she help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps to the medical fraternity. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. For obviously this is the crux of the problem. What sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he? Of what is he thinking? Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. Now we won't look at Jim just before we go to lunch. Joe just loves old Jim.
I love him.
He gets screwed up with him once in a while too. Let's see what we can do with Jim today, Joe.
Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. He's a good salesman. Everybody likes him.
Typical alcoholic, isn't he?
Right.
Yeah.
He's an intelligent man and normal so far as we can see, or except for a nervous disposition. Now, he did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he ought to be committed. On leaving the treatment center, the same thing. On leaving the treatment center, he came into contact with us. We told him what we knew of alcoholism.
They told him about step 1.
And the answer we had found.
They told him about step 2.
And he made a beginning.
Later on, we're going to see where step 3 is but a beginning. So apparently Jim took steps 1, 2, and 3, and immediately things started getting better for him.
His family was reassembled and began to work as a salesman for a business he had lost through drinking. And all went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life.
Oh, we're going to find the only way we can enlarge on our spiritual life, step 3, is through 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Jim didn't do any of those. He just did 1, 2, and 3.
Now, to his consternation, he found himself drunk a half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened.
These are great alcoholics. He got drunk 6 times in a row. Each time they went over there and very, very carefully worked with him. You get drunk 6 times in a row today, they're probably not going to have anything to do with you. These were good alcoholics.
He agreed he was a real alcoholic and in serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the treatment center if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had deep affection. Yet he got drunk again, and we asked him to tell us exactly how it happened.
Now, they're getting a little tired of Jim now. They said, "My God, Jim, this is the 7th time in a row you got drunk. Let's don't go through this anymore. Sit down here and tell us just exactly how this happened."
He said, "This is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning.
We read this book for years before we saw that. I came to work on Tuesday morning. Where was he all day Monday? Yeah, we Alkies are bad about Mondays, no doubt about that. Now we're going to look in his mind, and we're going to see where he went from sane to insane thinking, from normal to abnormal thinking. Let's look at old Jim's head.
He said, I remember I felt irritated. I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned.
I don't think that's insanity at all. I think that's normal. I think any of us that had to be a salesman for a concern that we once owned, we probably would be a little bit irritated by that.
He said, I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious.
Boss probably said, say, Jim, by the way, where were you all day yesterday anyhow? Nothing real serious, just enough to get him a little irritated.
Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car.
What's more normal? Then I want to get away from the shop for a while, drive out in the country. Apparently he's a car salesman, and he's going to go out there and see somebody he already knows to try to sell a car to him. That's normal, sane thinking for an alcoholic car salesman.
A little restless, a little irritable, a little discontented, so he had to get out of the office. On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I'd get a sandwich.
What's more normal than if we're hungry to go in a place to get a sandwich? The fact they've got a bar is beside the point. We have no intention of drinking. We're just going to go in there and get us a sandwich. That's normal, sane thinking for an alcoholic car salesman.
I also had the notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, but I've been going to it for years. I'd eaten there many times during the months I was sober.
What's more normal than to think, maybe I'll find another customer while I'm in there, and I'm not going in there to drink. Hell, I've been in there many times during the time I'm sober. I'm going in there to get me a sandwich because I'm hungry and try to sell a car. Normal, sane thinking for an alcoholic car salesman.
He said, I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking.
What's more normal than if you're hungry to sit down at a table and order a sandwich and a glass of milk? Normal, sane thinking for an alcoholic car salesman.
So I ordered another sandwich, decided to have another glass of milk.
Now, if you're hungry enough, there's nothing wrong with 2 sandwiches and 2 glasses of milk. Unless you're a member of Overeaters Anonymous, you better look at it. But for an alcoholic car salesman, that's normal thinking. 2 sandwiches and 2 glasses of milk. Normal, nothing wrong with that. Now comes the squiggly writing.
Now comes the italic writing. And it said suddenly, that means right now. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach.
Now this is absolute insanity. For him to believe that he can take alcohol, mix it with milk, and drink it on a full stomach, and it won't hurt him. Now, based on the insane idea, he now makes a decision and takes some action.
He said, I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. And I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart. So I felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another.
Now, we've got it inside ourselves now. The allergy takes over, and now then we can't stop.
It looks to me like about 5 glasses of milk and 3 or 4 shots of whiskey. That'll do things to you. Anyhow, he says, thus started one more journey to this island for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. Now, he had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in the favor of the foolish idea that he'd take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? And if you were looking for a definition of insanity, there it is. This lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else. Pure insanity.
Is Jim's real problem the fact that he has a physical allergy to alcohol? Or that he has a form of insanity that tells him it's okay to drink alcohol mixed with milk on a full stomach? The real problem centers in the mind rather than in the body. Our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. It's the side of a big highway, waiting for a big bus or a truck to come along, jumps out in front of it, spins around 2 or 3 times, sees how close it can come to hitting him without actually hitting him. For some reason, he gets a thrill out of it. I don't understand it, but I can see it. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. People are saying, hey, John, you better quit doing that. You're going to get hurt one of these days. But he doesn't pay any attention to him at all. Up to this point, you would label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he's slightly injured several times in succession. He's getting a little older now. He can't move as fast. They begin to hit him once in a while. Nothing serious. He just kind of bounces off of them. Now, you would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. But presently he's hit again, this time has a fractured skull. He gets hurt pretty bad this time. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He gets hurt bad again. Now he sings their national anthem. He tells you he's decided to stop jaywalking for good. He said, man, I'm through with this jaywalking. I'm tired of these fractured skulls, broken arms, and etc. I'll never jaywalk again as long as I live. But in a few weeks, he breaks both legs. Now, on through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work. He's just so beat up now, he can't hold a job. His wife gets a divorce. She's tired of supporting him and the hospital bills and everything else. And he's held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. Not his body, his head. He shuts himself up in a treatment center, hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? Now, you may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol has been involved, we've been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? Now, some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we have some of these symptoms, but we've not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to. We understand ourselves so well after what you've told us that such things could not happen again. We've not lost everything in life through drinking. We certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. And I think that is so appropriate today. You know, once again, because of education, we have many, many people coming to us in AA before they've had to lose everything. You know, once in a while you see somebody come in AA that's still got a job. Sometimes somebody will come in and they're still married. And believe it or not, I saw one come in not long ago and he still had an automobile. And they say, now, we've not lost everything through drinking. We're not as bad as you guys are. We know that applies to you, but that doesn't necessarily apply to us. You see, we got two kinds of drunks in AA. We got the low-bottom drunk, the one who's lost everything. That was Jim. Jim had lost all, and he had to work for a concern that he once owned. And Jim was really, really desperate before he got through there. And then we have the high-bottom drunk. And sometimes a high-bottom drunk who's never really lost anything through drinking, it's harder for them to see the insanity of alcoholism. It's harder for the high-bottom drunk to see the absolute powerless, hopeless condition of the mind and body than it is for the low-bottom drunk. And sometimes a high-bottom drunk will say, yeah, some of the things what you are telling me applies, but I'm really not as bad as you guys were. Thanks for the information anyhow. Now we're going to look at an example of a guy that was a high-bottom drunk. Jim was low-bottom. We're going to look at a high-bottom drunk. we're going to look at a fellow named Fred. Now, Fred has never lost anything through his drinking. He's never been in serious trouble through his drinking. But he gets drunk just exactly like Jim did. Just before he took a drink, he believed a lie. And he took an action based upon the lie and ended up drunk all over again. So let's take a look at Fred, starting on the second paragraph on page 39. Joe?
So Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, is happily married, and father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it's Fred. To all appearance, he's a stable, well-balanced individual, yet he's alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he'd gone to recover from a bad case of the jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself he'd come to the hospital to rest his nerves.
We see lots of nerve resters in AA today, just like old Fred is.
The doctor intimated strongly it might be worse than he realized. For a few days he was depressed about his condition. Now, he made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so, in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic.
He would not take step one.
Much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem.
If you can't take one, you can't take two.
We told him what we knew of alcoholism.
They told him about 1 and 2.
And he was interested and conceded he had some of the symptoms. But he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about himself. He was positive that his humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. Now, we heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told that he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told is most instructive. For here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment, determination, and all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Well, let him tell you about it. He said, I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I'd learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men had failed. I felt I had every right to be self-confident. That would be only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. Now, in this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks, and I began to wonder if I had not been making too hard a work on this simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present accounting evidence to a government bureau. I've been out of town during this particular dry spell, so there's nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased, knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. Fred was doing real good, wasn't he? Everything was good, business good, family good. He's feeling good. Everything's wonderful in Fred's life on that day.
He's just floating along. He said, I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails and go back to the hospital. Now that's the truth, isn't it? But you see, he couldn't drink on the truth. He had to drink on the lie. He said it'd be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all, nothing more. Now, based on the insane idea, based upon the lie, he made a decision and took some action. I ordered a cocktail in my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. Now we've got it inside ourselves. The physical allergy takes over, and now we can't stop. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed, so I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night, and plenty next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York. and of finding a friendly taxi cab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. Old Fred, or old Jim, vaguely sensed that he wasn't any too smart. Fred didn't even sense that. Fred just thought a couple of cocktails with dinner would be great. And based upon that insane idea, he took the cocktails, triggered the allergy, couldn't stop drinking, and ended up drunk all over again. Now, is his real problem the fact that he has a physical allergy to alcohol? Or that he has a form of insanity that tells him it's okay to drink alcohol? The real problem of the alcoholic centers in our mind, telling us we can drink, rather than in our body that ensures that we can't drink. Let's go over to page 43, last paragraph.
It says, once more. He just told us through the illustration of Jim, the man of 30, Jay Walker, and Fred. Now he's going to tell us once more.
That's the way you talk to alcoholics. You tell them over and over again, and eventually they hear.
So he said, once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. So you can't heal a sick mind with a sick mind. You can't think your way out of it. The more you try to think about it, the deeper into it you get. See, Bill tried to stay sober on self-knowledge. Roland tried to stay sober on self-knowledge. Fred tried to stay sober on self-knowledge. And the jaywalker tried to stay sober on self-knowledge. But you can't heal a sick mind with a sick mind. And that's what this chapter is all about. We can't do it. We must have a power greater than ourselves if we're to solve this problem.
Through chapter 3, he has now closed the door on me entirely. He's let me see just exactly what's going to happen to me if I don't find that power greater than human power, where God is our understanding. And if you're the kind of alcoholic that I am, and if you'd been raised in the church setting that I was raised in as a kid growing up, then at the end of chapter 3, you're faced with one hell of a dilemma. Because I could see and fully understand that if I didn't find that power, that God as I understand him in my life, that I was going to end up going back to drinking again. But I knew also that that God that I understood would have nothing to do with me. That was good. You see, I was raised in a good old Southern Baptist church. And I got nothing against the Southern Baptist church, didn't have then, don't have today. But in the old Southern Baptist church down where Joe and I came from, I'm quite sure that from time to time they talked about a kind and a loving God. But if they did, that message never got to the pew that I sat in. Because all I could ever remember as a kid growing up about God was hellfire and damnation. Going to hell for lying and cheating and stealing and drinking whiskey and committing adultery. And by the time I got to AA, I'd been doing that for about 26 years. And I knew that God had already told St. Peter, when that little four-eyed sucker gets up here, send him downstairs, we'll not need his kind. I remember so clearly when I separated from God as a kid growing up. They told me in church what I could do and what I couldn't do. They said, if you do this, this, and this, you'll be okay. And if you do that, that, and that, you're going to hell just sure as anything. And I didn't have any trouble with those rules at all until I got to be about 12 or 13 years old. And it seemed to me as though one day the minister looked me straight in the eye. And he said, to think about doing it is just as bad as doing it. And I said, oh, shit, I've had it now. Because I'd been thinking about doing it for about a year. And fact, I'd been thinking about doing it so much I was starting to get a little brain damage from it. And I said to myself, well, if you're going to go to hell for thinking about doing it, then why not just go ahead and do it? And I did it. And I didn't go to hell immediately. And I said, that sucker has been lying to me all along. And I said, that minister and my parents and my school teachers have joined together in a conspiracy to keep me from having any fun. And from this day on, I don't intend to pay any attention to what any of them has to say. I said, from this day on, if I'm going to have any fun in my life, I'm going to do what I want to, whenever I want to, and if they don't like it, to hell with them. And I walked away from all parental discipline. I walked away from all God idea disciplines. I walked away from any ideas about God. And from that day on, I ran my life the way I wanted to run it. Now, when I got to AA, I was 40 years old. And I got here with the spiritual knowledge of a 12-year-old boy who had defied God, his parents, his teachers, and everybody else. No wonder I had trouble with this God thing. And thank God Bill Wilson's a real alcoholic. He knew exactly how I was going to feel. Because Bill Wilson had the same problems when it came to this God thing. Just like he talked about to Christ, he conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching most excellent. He adopted the parts he wanted, and the rest of them he just let them slide. Same problem. And I can see Bill as he finishes up this chapter 3, saying to himself, now I was able to show them the problem through the doctor's opinion and my story, Bill's story. I was able to show them the solution through chapter 2. I was able to show them what's going to happen to them if they don't find that solution through chapter 3, more about alcoholism. But I think he then said to himself, they're going to have the same problem with that solution that I had myself. And I believe he said to himself, they're going to be unable to make a decision about this God thing based upon those old ideas that they were taught as kids growing up. Now I think he said, maybe I better give them some new ideas about this God thing. Maybe I better give them some new ideas about God so they can discard some of the old ideas about God. Because the next thing they're going to have to do in this program is make a decision. And it's impossible to make the decision based on those old ideas and old prejudices. And he sat down and he wrote another chapter just for me. Just for me. And he called it We Agnostics. And for years I wouldn't mess with We Agnostics. I thought it dealt too much with religion. But I finally began to read it and study it, and I finally began to see it has nothing to do with religion, period.